Hey, what's up, everybody? What's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show. What's up? Shane Kohler here. Pleasure to be back with you today. In today's episode, we're talking about the title is what is the title? He's not showing his interest. Should I walk? So in today's episode, the title is He's not showing his interest. Should I walk? And this episode is for anyone who I could apply to a range of different people. But if you feel like you're in a situation where you're putting in more than you're getting out of it, if you feel like you're investing and the other person is not reciprocating, if you feel like you're more interested in it than they are, if you feel like you're putting in all the effort, but they're not putting in the same amount of effort, or if you feel like you're sitting around waiting to hear from them, when are they going to call? When are they going to text? Are they thinking about me? And they seem to just be off living their life, oblivious to any of it, right? So if you've been or if you are currently in any of the above positions, then this episode is for you. And I think this is an important episode because there's a lot that is said out there about how it should be, about how it should look, about what's supposed to happen, about what's not supposed to happen. And I think the advice can be very confusing because, I'll just say this. I've heard the way a lot of coaches talk about it out there. And they're like, oh, well, if a guy is interested in you, he's going to do this and he's going to do this and he's going to do this and he's going to do this. And if he's not doing this, then you should leave him. And I'm not saying that advice is wrong necessarily, but I think it's very nuanced. And the thing about it is that when people are dating, it's a very vulnerable position, right? It's a very, very vulnerable position. It's a very confusing position because your expectations may not be the same expectations that somebody else has, right? The way you're looking at the situation may not be the same way that someone else is looking at the situation. And so to assume that just because people say it's supposed to be like this, or it's supposed to be like this, or it's supposed to be like that, I think that can be very, very confusing and very, very misguided. And if you're dating someone, I want to just start with this idea. If you're dating someone, whether you're you've been on one date with them, whether you've been dating them for several months, whether you've even if you've been with them for a year or something like that, there is no substitute for clear, authentic, vulnerable communication. There's just no substitute for that. There's no way around it. And if you have not had a heart-to-heart with the person, if you have not had clear discussions about what you're looking for, about what you want, about what you would like to see from them, about what makes you feel safe, right? If you haven't gone there with that person, then sitting back in your isolation and saying that, oh, well, they haven't done this and they haven't done that and they haven't done the other thing, you're really not even giving them a chance to. And that's what I'm going to want to explore today. Because as much as I think there is something to be said for men taking the role of the pursuer, and let me just speak into that first, right? I think there is something to be said for men taking the role of the pursuer. And there are several reasons for that, right? Because one, I think dating is just inherently more vulnerable for women than it is for men. Women struggle with safety more than men do. That's just a fact, right? So I think there's something to be said for a man who understands that, who recognizes that and says, hey, I want to make you feel safe, right? Like I want to let you know that I'm here for you and I'm interested and I care and I want to explore this. And like, I want to make you feel safe to explore this with me. And I think that's huge. And I think that's important. But I also think that to expect a man to do that without giving him any sense of letting him know you want him to do that, letting him know that it's okay for him to do that, right? Inviting him into that with you. And there are different ways you can do that. And I'm going to speak into all of that today, right? But just sitting back again in like an isolated state, like I'm not going to make the move. I'm not going to call. I'm not going to text. I'm not going to do anything. If he wants me, he'll show up for me. I think that's just not true a lot of times because there's a lot that's not being addressed there. And let's just talk about some of the things that are not being addressed there. Maybe his expectations are different than yours. right? Like, let's just start there. Like, you might think, I want someone to call or text me every day. And he might think, if I call or text her every day, that's going to make me look desperate. That's going to make her think that like I don't have a life or I don't have anything going on, right? So he might be in his mind thinking that you actually want to see less from him, and he's giving you what he thinks you want to see. Meanwhile, you're expecting more and getting bent out of shape that he's not giving you more, right? And I'm not saying that one way is right and the other way is wrong. I'm saying this is the exact reason why we need honest, authentic, sincere, vulnerable communication when we're dating someone. Because the truth is, people just come from different places. We see things differently. We have different experiences, different upbringings. We go through so many different things. And when you get to the point in life where you are meeting someone and you are dating them, you have no idea how they see it. You have no idea how they think about it. You don't know any of that. You only know the way you see it. And to sit in your isolated perspective and assume that the way you see it is the way it should be, and that if it's not showing up that way, it's wrong or there's something missing. What's going to happen when you do that is you're going to kill a lot of potential that could be there otherwise. So when you start getting to know someone, we could take it from, first date. I often say that, like, after a first date, as a woman, this is advice I give specifically to women. I think for men, it's nice when they do it, but I think it is particularly powerful when a woman does this. So after a first date, if you had and be genuine, I'm not saying just say this to anybody, but if you had a great time and if you want to see him again, I say after a first date, text him and let him know that. Now, you might be like, well, why should I have to do that? If he likes me, if he wants to see me again, he should do that. Well, you got to remember that, like, the position that we're putting men in this whole thing, which I think is valid and I think is right? We're wanting men to be the pursuers. We're wanting men to create that safe space and to let you know, like, hey, it's okay. I want to explore this with you, right? Like, that is the role that we want men to take. And so if that's the role that we want men to take, we've got to think about what needs to happen in the interactions between the woman and the man that is going to naturally have him want to step into that role, right? What is, like, not that you have to pull his teeth to get him to do it, but like, what's going to most naturally just have him be like, I want to step into this role for her. I want to be that safe space that lets her know that I'm interested and that I care and that I want to see this go somewhere, right? Well, what's going to have him do that? One of the biggest things that's going to have him do that is encouraging him along the way. I understand that encouraging someone is very vulnerable. It is very scary, right? It's not something that that comes natural to us. And the reason for that is that, I mean, we have a lot of past trauma and, we don't need to go into all of that necessarily, but we've all been rejected. We've all been heartbroken. We've all been let down. We've all gotten our hopes up about somebody and been manipulated by them. Like, we've all been through that. And it's important to say here that men have been through that just as much as women have been through that, right? Like, it's not like that's something that only one side goes through. Everybody is going through that. And so when we are meeting on a first date or second date or even a couple months in, there's often, and not always, and I'm going to talk about the cases when it's not there, but there is often a sincere desire on both sides to get to know each other, right? Like, both people are feeling this, like, wow, I like this. This is exciting. I want to know this person more. I want to see where this goes, right? Often both people are feeling that. And what's also happening with both people is they're saying, I don't really trust this person. And they're trying to read between the lines, and they're trying to say, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And did that mean what I thought it meant? Or did what they said, did I take that the wrong way? Right? Like we're all doing this, and it's very confusing. And the way it happens for most people in the dating world is, like, you need a decodering system to understand what the other person says and what the other person thinks. And the reason it feels that way is because nobody is offering clear, direct, vulnerable, authentic communication. What we're doing instead is we're dropping hints and we're putting our toe in the water to feel it out. And we're saying, well, if I do this or if I say this and they respond this way, then that means it's a bad sign. But if they respond this way, that means it's a good sign. And we're playing all these kinds of weird ass games to try to solve some kind of mystery. And then the illusion is that we think we're going to solve the mystery. And then once we solve the mystery, we're going to be like, okay, now I know, now I feel totally safe in this relationship. And now I'm going to let myself go in it. But if you've noticed in your own experience, those kinds of weird games never really lead to that result, do they? No, they just lead to more and more confusion, more and more weird games. And even what often happens when we're kind of playing these games is the signals that we're sending someone to like kind of let them know we're interested, but we're only half-assed letting them know we're interested. We're not sincerely letting them know we're interested. These signals are often misinterpreted as lack of interest because like we're sitting there going like, is this person going to tell me they like me? Are they going to tell me they want to move forward? Are they going to tell me they want something more? And then they come out with some kind of half committal comment like, you know, you're cool. I really like you. Maybe we'll hang out sometime or what. I don't know. That's probably not the best example. But my point is when somebody is waiting for like something real, something solid, and all they're getting are these kind of half-assed responses, what's happening is they are making up in their mind that you're not that interested. And so, yes, we want men to step into this role of pursuing and like calling and planning dates and planning things. And at the same time, we want to encourage the man to do that every step of the way. So I just gave an example earlier of, you know, after a first date, right? If you went on a first date with a guy and you had a great time and you want to see him again and the attraction's there, like when you get home that night, text him and tell him that. So it's like, hey, I just want to let you know I had a wonderful time tonight and I would love to see you again. Now, I acknowledge that's a very vulnerable thing to do because you're kind of putting yourself out. And if he comes back and says, sorry, you know, you're nice, but I'm not that into it or whatever, like you're going to have to live with the fact that you put yourself out there and got rejected. And that's scary and that's painful. And believe me, I more than most people know that feeling. Like, and let me just say, like, as a man, as the one who's, you know, when I was dating, like I was always kind of expected to do that. I can't tell you how many times I did that and got rejected. Right. So it's also like, just to put it in context, like a lot of times if you're sitting in your isolation and saying, well, I want him to make all the moves, you're asking him to offer you something that you're not even willing to offer yourself. Right. And that's not reciprocal. So yes, I know what it feels like to be like, hey, I really like you and to get rejected. I know what that feels like. That feeling sucks. But at the end of the day, what's the big deal? And so this is where we've got to look a little deeper at what's really going on for us, that we can't even face a simple rejection. And this isn't a judgment, this isn't a criticism, but it's just a curiosity question. Because rejection comes with the territory, and not even in love, in life. You want that promotion at work, you might get rejected, right? Like it's just everything in life requires you to put yourself out there. Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no. And powerful people just get that. They just recognize that and they just learn to come to terms with rejection. So if you send that text, hey, I really liked you, had a great time, I'd love to see you again. And they say, hey, you're awesome, great getting to know you, I don't think I want to take this any further. Or maybe they even ghost you. Maybe they don't even respond at all. And now you're left with, oh, that hurts. Ooh, that feeling that right in the center of your chest. You know what that feels like, right? Or maybe it's in your stomach for some of you, right? but it's that feeling and it doesn't feel good. And then let's put it in context, because let's say this was a first date. 2 weeks ago, you didn't even know the person. Like before they showed up on your dating app or whatever, like you'd never even heard of them. So the fact that some stranger in the world doesn't want to be with you isn't really that big of a deal. So it's not even the situation itself that's really a problem. The problem is what you do with that situation in your mind, the story you tell yourself about that situation in your mind. Oh, well, they don't like me. And if they don't like me, someone else isn't going to like me, or what's wrong with me, or I'm ugly, or I'm unattractive, or I have a bad personality, or I don't know how to connect with people, or I'm awkward, and like whatever. I mean, but you start telling yourself a story in your mind of your own inadequacy, of your own incapability, of your own unlovability. And if you really look, that story is not just something you're telling yourself in this isolated situation. If you're honest, there were elements of that story there even before you went on the date. And even after you've forgotten about this situation, there are still going to be elements of that story there. And when you go on your next date, there are going to be elements of that story. So the elements of the story, this kind of narrative that you're running in your mind, convincing yourself of your own inadequacy and your own unlovability, that has nothing to do with that person. It has nothing to do with being rejected. It's actually just a constant thread that kind of runs in the background throughout your life. And yes, if we looked at your childhood, we could say, well, maybe there were certain things you didn't get from your mother or your father that caused you to start developing that narrative. Or we could say that when you were in middle school or high school and you started, having a crush on the boys or the girls in class, and you started to interact in that way, and certain things happened that caused you to develop this narrative, right? So of course there are causes for it. There are reasons for it. But the point is that this has nothing to do with your life right now. It has nothing to do with the person you are right now. It has nothing to do with the person you're dating. This is a thread that has been running through your life from a very, very long time ago. And as that thread continues to run through your life, it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because that thread running through the background is what causes you to withhold your authentic, sincere, vulnerable communication. It's also what causes you to withhold like the things that are amazing about you, right? You're like, I'm going to tell this joke. And then you're like, oh no, I'm not going to tell the joke because it might not be well received. Right. Or I'm going to point out this or that, or make a comment. And then like, oh, well, like you're filtering yourself, right? Everything that comes to your mind, you're like filtering. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Because you're afraid to really let yourself out, because you're afraid that who you are authentically is not going to be received, is not going to be loved, is not going to be accepted. And so this is the real problem. This is the real problem. And as long as this thread is running in the background, it's going to continue to show up in that kind of non-committal, lukewarm sentiment where you're never really invested with anybody. You're never really meeting anybody as a real human being. And it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the experience that people are going to have with you is like, wow, they were cool. They were nice. I had fun, but there was just something missing. Like just didn't really connect the way I wanted it to. And the reason people are left with that experience is because they're not getting all of you. They're getting a filtered, watered down version of you. So while they might think you're attractive, while they might think you're funny, while they might think you're cool, while they might see certain qualities about you that are really great, that deep level of like, is just, it's not there. They're not connecting the way they want to. And so if you're asking yourself the question, should I walk, right? This relationship isn't going the way I thought it would. It's not It's not, they're not making the effort. They're not giving me the attention. They're not calling and texting enough. They're not planning enough dates. They're not bringing up conversations about the future, whatever. Like, my first question would be, have you really connected with them and had like a sincere heart to heart? And if you say no, if you say I really haven't, like have you, when I say heart to heart, let me explain that a little bit further. Have you been really vulnerable with them? Have you been honest about what you want? Have you asked them for what you want? Have you let them know how you feel about them? Have you said, like, listen, I really like you. I think you're amazing. Like, I would sincerely like to explore a real relationship with you. And if you haven't, then I just simply need to point out that you have no idea how they would respond if you did. You might have all kinds of stories in your mind. Oh, well, I could only do that if this happens, or if that happens, or if the other thing happens, right? But the truth is, you have no idea how they would actually respond if you did. And there's this story in your mind that says, well, I can never do that until it feels totally safe to. And I honestly don't even know if there is such a time. Like, I really don't know if that time will ever come. I think often it is these conversations that create the safety, but even more, before we start talking about the other person, let's talk about internal safety, because what actually creates the internal safety is you burning up that limiting thread that's running in the background of your consciousness. And the way to do that is to practice authentic, vulnerable communication. So it's really simple. If you start getting clear that with every person I meet, that I'm sincerely attracted to, that I'm sincerely interested in, that I see a real possibility with, right? With every person I meet that I feel that way about, I'm going to make a point to be honest about it. I'm going to make a point to be true. And I'm going to do that knowing without a doubt that sometimes that is going to lead to rejection. And when I say rejection, like, rejection is even a loaded word. Like, we could replace the word with we could replace the word rejection with just they said no, or they were in a different place, or they wanted a different thing. So that's not even really a rejection. It's just like, hey, I think you're awesome, and I want a long-term committed relationship. And that person's like, hey, I think you're awesome, but I want a casual relationship. That's not a rejection. Like, do you get that? That's not a rejection. That's just, okay, cool. We like each other and we're incompatible. Hey, you know what? I'm going to go look for my long-term committed relationship. You go look for that casual relationship you want. Maybe we'll circle back in a few years and be in a different place. Maybe not, but hey, wish you the best of luck. And if you can just get comfortable navigating these experiences, you will find that rejection is never really what you thought it was. Because the only real reason for rejection is incompatibility. You want different things. You're in different places. You're pursuing different interests. If you weren't, the relationship would work. But a lot of us feel that it is not okay to want love and to want to be loved and to want a long-term committed relationship. A lot of us feel that that is just not okay. And let me say, I understand. I understand that because our culture has largely taught us that it's not okay. And I mean, this goes way back. I mean, like, honestly, we probably picked this up in childhood in ways that we don't even realize. Like, when we were very, very young, we internalized this conversation in ways that we didn't even realize we did. But then even like if you start, I think I always use the examples of middle school and high school. And the reason I use those examples is because that's when we first start allowing ourselves to interact romantically for the most part. And those first impressions that we get when we are very first starting to interact romantically, those first impressions that we get, they stick. That's why when I look at the dating world, I see a bunch of grown ass adults behaving like high schoolers. And that's not a criticism, but that's just what happens because that's where we learn, right? Like when you're in high school, that's when you start dating. That's when you have your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend. Like that's where we learn how to date. And most of us never get an education beyond that. And so, in most areas of our lives, we go on to become these highly capable, incredible adults. But in our love lives and in our dating lives, we're still kind of like teenagers. And look, in high school, I get it. Like if you had a crush on someone and they didn't like you back in high school, like, I mean, that could get really ugly. Like you could be publicly ridiculed and criticized. Like there were big stakes there. And so we internalize that and we carry that with us. And there is a certain narrative in our culture that says, if you sincerely want to love and be loved, there's something wrong with you. You should be stronger than that. You shouldn't need that from someone. Why are you so desperate? Why are you so pathetic? Like these are the narratives. And so we are out there seeking love and pretending that we don't want it. Like think about how insane that is. I'm out there looking for something and pretending like I don't want it. Like imagine going into a job interview, pretending like you don't want the job. How crazy would that be? But it's literally what we're doing. And so for those of us who are committed, like really committed to, I am going to have the love of my life. I am going to create this amazing relationship. Like I will have that. That will be a part of my story. For those of us who feel that way about it, we've got to level up. And we've got to learn a new set of skills that most people in the world are not teaching. And this is the thing too. And I think this is important because just because you have learned this set of skills doesn't mean that the person you're dating has learned it. And so you're in a unique position of not only having to be vulnerable, but also having to be vulnerable where the other person may not be available for your vulnerability. Like it's highly possible that you step into being this very mature adult and when I talk about being a mature adult, I just want to give a little description of that. I'm talking about, I'm okay with my needs, my desires, my wants, my feelings, right? Like I have accepted that. I have owned that. I have no shame around that. I don't need to hide that. I don't need to pretend like that's not the case. Like I am fully in acceptance of the fact that I want to love. I want to be loved. I am seeking that. I am looking for that in my life. And I'm not ashamed of that. I recognize that that is totally normal. That is totally human. That is totally valid. And I own that. And if you are operating in that place, you may put that out in the world and be met with a high school response. Like, oh, I don't know. Whoa, that's a lot. Like you might get met with that. And then the question becomes, when and if you are met with that, do you take that personally? Or do you just see it as an incompatibility? Do you see that somebody who responds that way, somebody whose emotional intelligence is that dense, could never, ever, ever be the kind of person you want to have in your life? Right? Do you see that? And so if you recognize that, just that simple fact, you can actually start to get excited about sharing your vulnerability, because you start to see that, wow, every time I share my vulnerability, I learn everything I need to know just by how the person responds. That person who like laughs in your face, so to speak, or maybe they don't laugh in your face, but maybe they're just like, oh, I don't know, like you're putting the pressure on real hard here, right? Like something like that. You can actually even just feel sorry for that person, because you're like, man, like you're just dense. You lack the ability to connect with someone on a real level. Like when someone is real with you, it scares you away. Like that sucks for you. I'm sorry that you have to go through life like that, because that's a painful and lonely way to live. Like when you get clear about who you are, you can start to actually see other people for who they are and not take it personally. But as long as you're not okay with who you are, as long as you're insecure about who you are, you're going to take other people's opinions of you very personally. You're going to withhold and hide your authenticity, and you will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that withholding will cause you to show up to relationships in a way where you invite yourself to be manipulated by toxic people, and people who are sincerely looking to connect with you are going to say, I just don't get the connection I'm looking for here. So going back to the topic, he's not showing his interest. Should I walk? Let's talk about, like, beginning to end, navigating a relationship and how you actually get to that answer. Now, I've already given the example of after the first date, you text and say, hey, I had a great date. I would love to see you again. That is not only an encouragement for the other person to continue pursuing you, it's also a test for them. How do they handle that? Do they not respond for days? Do they give you some kind of half-assed response? Or do they actually say, yeah, I had a wonderful time too. I'd like to see you again as well. Really, the third response is the only appropriate one that shows real potential. And that might seem like a minor thing, but I want you to think about this. Like, they are demonstrating, when they give you that response, they are demonstrating their ability to receive your vulnerability, appreciate it, and honor it with a reciprocal response. Now, I know it's a small gesture and it seems like a small thing, but that speaks droves in terms of the potential that's there, right? It's like $1 million worth of potential there. But had you never sent that message, you never would have found out how they would respond. And so instead of getting clarity right after the first date, maybe you sit and wait for a text or a call for the next 3 days in your head, wondering, why haven't they called? Why haven't they texted? Did I do something wrong? Are they going to ghost me? Right? Like, you're in your head about all this, where if they were going to ghost you, you could have figured that out 24 hours after the date. Here you are 72 hours later, a week later, sitting in your mind, stressing out about it, wondering, because you don't have the courage to just be authentic with the person. And then if you think about what happens in the space between that first date and a week later, and all the anxiety that builds up inside of you and all the rumination and all the wondering and all of that, right? If you think about everything that happens in the space of that first week, by the time they do call or text you, you might be such an anxious mess that like you sabotage the relationship anyway. And I truly think when we don't honor ourselves, we create more anxiety. Right? Like if I wanted to like genuinely just connect with that person and I withheld that because I was like, "Oh, I don't want them to think anything of me or I don't want to be judged or whatever." Like if I want to reach out, I want to connect, but I withhold that, now I'm building my own anxiety because there's actually energy that wanted to move through me that I stopped, and now it's stuck and now it's stagnant and now it's just building up inside of me. So we could say that would be like test number one or step number one is just to send that text. But what comes after that? Well, let's say that you send that text and they respond and it's great and you go to bed feeling really good because you sent the text and they responded and you're like, oh, great, good connection. We both like each other. Awesome. You go to bed feeling really good. And then maybe a couple of days goes by, maybe 2 or 3 days, and you don't hear anything. And this might be the point where it's like 2 or 3 days went by. I haven't heard anything. Maybe I should just walk. Maybe they're going to ghost me. If they were really interested, they would have texted me by now. They must have not meant what they said the other night, right? And we start getting in all our head about all this stuff. Well, you may, and if I were coaching you, I might have some questions, and depending on the situation, I may say, well, send one more follow-up text. I wouldn't send more than one, but sometimes maybe you can send one. Sometimes maybe not. But whether you send the next interaction or they send the next interaction, when you connect again, a conversation is warranted. And so let's say maybe like 4 or 5 days goes by and then they reach out and they're like, "Hey, how you doing? Want to see you this weekend," right? And for 4 or 5 days, you've been in your head like, why haven't they texted me? Why haven't they called? We had a great date. They said they liked me. Everything was good. And then they just go dark for 5 days. What the hell is wrong with this person? And you're all in your head about it. And then 5 days later, they send you a text like, "Hey, would love to see you this weekend," as though nothing weird had ever happened, right? And you're going, how the fuck can they just reach out to me like nothing weird has happened when they've just ghosted me for the last 5 days, right? I know some of you are relating to what I'm saying right now. Well, this is where you've got to have a little compassion. You've got to have a little patience. You've got to be able to regulate yourself a little bit, right? So as you're waiting that 4 or 5 days, you want to be talking to yourself like, well, let's just see. Let's just see what happens. Like, not like, oh, it's wrong that they haven't called, but just more like, let's see when they will call. Like, I'm just curious. Like, it's more of a curiosity thing, right? Like, let's see how long it takes them. What does that reveal about them? Now, there's a big conversation, and I think this is just as true for women as it is for men, is they say, like, don't call for like 3 or 4 days after a date. And I know that's like super outdated, right? It's like, who even does that anymore? But like, I think it's a big thing. And this goes back to that high school drama bullshit that we've talked about. But there's a belief that if I call you the next day after a date, it looks desperate. It looks like I have nothing going on, right? There's a belief that I should be secure and happy enough in my own life that one date should be enough for a few days, that I don't need to connect with you immediately after that. And then I can go and be out in my life and be doing my things. And then, maybe a few days goes by and then it's more appropriate to connect. I think as we become more emotionally intelligent as a society, not just as individuals, but as we become more emotionally intelligent and as we start to really understand and respect how vulnerable dating is and how anxiety provoking it is, I think people are starting to get it more and more that no, you actually don't need to act like it's all cool. It's actually kinder to reach out to the person. And I think more and more people are understanding that, and more people are doing that. but there's still a lot of people that don't. And if the person reaches out 4 or 5 days later, honestly, I think that is socially acceptable. Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal. Ideal would be someone who is emotionally intelligent enough to say, this person is probably sitting around waiting for my text, and I want to do the kind thing and let them know that I'm thinking about them, right? That is the ideal thing. But I do think 4 or 5 days is socially acceptable. 2 weeks is not socially acceptable. If they wait 2 weeks, I think that's a red flag right there. But given that this person may very well have been thinking about you that entire 4 or 5 days, and they just wanted to wait an appropriate amount of time because they didn't want to look desperate, or they didn't want you to judge them, or they didn't want you to think that they had no life outside of you, about the fact that you were anxiously waiting to hear from them, well, you could also be compassionate about the fact that they were afraid of looking desperate in front of you. And this isn't a good, bad, right, or wrong thing. It's just something that needs to be discussed. It's just something that requires, as I've said many times today, authentic, vulnerable communication. So let's say 4 or 5 days later, they reach out, hey, what are you doing this weekend? I'd love to see you again. I wouldn't bring it up on the spot. Like that would be kind of a nasty thing to do, right? I haven't heard from you in 4 or 5 days, right? Now, this person is like probably doing their best. They think they're doing the right thing. And the immediate response is like, no call 4 or 5 days. What's wrong with you? Like, no, that's an asshole move. I would respond very happily to that person. I'd say, yeah, I would love to see you this weekend. That'd be great. What did you have in mind? Blah, blah, blah. You set something up, you make plans. Then on the date, I would bring it up. And I wouldn't even bring it up first thing. I'd bring it up later in the night, right? Like you don't want to make it seem like it's a huge deal, because honestly, it's not a huge deal. This is all very, very normal stuff. It's not a huge deal. But just because it's not a huge deal doesn't mean it shouldn't be addressed. Because if you don't address it, well, now you're just allowing the behavior to continue. Now you're letting them think that that's the right thing to do. So it needs to be addressed. And on that date, I might say something like, hey, we had a great time on our first date, and I noticed that I didn't hear from you for like 4 or 5 days afterwards. What was that about? Not a judgment, not like, it's really a dick move that I didn't hear from you in 4 or 5 days. No, it's a curiosity question. I'm curious. I want to know. I'm not assuming that I already know, right? I'm just curious, like what was going on? And maybe they say, oh, I was just really busy at work, or my family was in town, or I don't know. I thought maybe I should give you a few days. I didn't want to look desperate. Like they might say any number of things. And what they say doesn't really matter, because their reasoning isn't important. What's important is that you bring up the conversation so that you can share your truth, and so that you can ask them for what you need. So, I was busy at work, my family was in town, blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay, that's cool. I get that. But, I would like to be honest with you about something. Is that when I'm getting to know someone, I do appreciate consistency. Like it means a lot to me when someone can be consistent with me. And, this part that I'm about to say would be more of a personal preference. So some people would like to hear from someone every day. Some people would like to hear from someone maybe every couple of days. So it's very much a personal preference, but this is where you would ask for what you need from the person. Right? So you'd say, when I'm getting to know someone, like I really appreciate consistency. It means a lot to me when someone can be consistent with me. And I know you have a busy life, and I'm not trying to, disrupt your life or anything, but if you could just like shoot me a text every day, I'd really appreciate that. Even if it's just good morning or good night or something, but just, let me know that you haven't forgotten about me. That would mean a lot to me. That is like beautiful, authentic, vulnerable communication. And I don't know a human being on the planet who's not a narcissist or a sociopath who wouldn't get that. Like, people get that. Any human being who is even remotely emotionally intelligent, who has ever been rejected in their life, or who has ever been heartbroken in their life, they get that. It's not an unreasonable request. It's just not. Now, I said earlier that when you send that text after a first date, that's like a first test, right? Like, let's see how they handle this. Let's see how they respond to this. Well, this conversation on your second date, this would be like test number 2. First, how do they respond to this? Right? So are they like, "Oh my God, I just met you. Why are you being such a pain in the ass?" Like, okay, well, if they respond that way, then huge red flag. And it's like I'm just putting myself in that position. Like, if I was on that date and somebody said that, I'd be like, you know what? I think I just saw everything I needed to. I hope you have a wonderful night. I'm going to excuse myself. And I would just get up and leave. But if they're like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Yeah, I could do that. That's not a big deal. Like a morning or a good night text. Yeah, I could do that. That's not a big deal. Well, now you're building more commitment with them, right? It's like, it's interesting how this has been taken from no commitment to a higher level of commitment, right? You're actually in this conversation, you are calling forth this person's commitment. First, you're just finding out, do they have the emotional capacity to hear me and honor what I'm asking for? And that's a big one right there. Number 2, if they do have the emotional capacity to hear me and honor what I'm asking for, do they care enough to actually keep their word and follow through with that? And do they understand the importance of when they tell me they're going to do something that they actually do it? Right? And so there's so much incredible value in this because you're calling them into a higher level of commitment. You're testing their emotional capacity. You're testing their ability to hear and honor your needs. You're testing their ability to keep their word and do what they say they're going to do. Like, there is so much incredible value in all of this. And so let's say they, on the date, they're like, I get that. Yeah, I could text you, no problem. Morning, good night, definitely. Yeah, I'll do that, right? And so you establish that on the date, and then let's say the next day, 24 hours goes by, you don't hear from them. Things are getting interesting. Now we're getting closer and closer to the point where you walk. Now, I mean, honestly, like, I would say in most situations, that would be a deal breaker right there. If they texted you 5 days in a row and then missed a day, that would not be a deal breaker. But the very next day, they don't do it for me, that's a deal breaker. It's like, okay, I was authentic. I was vulnerable. I spoke my truth. I made a vulnerable, heartfelt request. You gave me your word. And the very next day, you don't even make the effort to follow through with it. That reveals something about their character. That reveals that they are the kind of person who says what you want to hear, but don't give a fuck that they say it. That's important information for you to know. And it's better that you know it on the second date versus the 10th date. Right? So, like, this is very important information for you to be figuring out here. Now, I said if he did it like 5 days in a row and then missed the 6th day, that wouldn't be a deal breaker. Because I would see in that he sincerely made the effort for several days in a row And on that sixth day, I would just be curious. And honestly, if he missed one day, like if he did 5 days, missed one day, and then picked up on the seventh day and just kept with it, it might not even be worth mentioning because he's sincerely making the effort and people make mistakes sometimes. Maybe he just had a really busy day. Maybe he got caught up. Like, it's not about being a ball buster, right? Like it's not about like, I caught you slipping. Like, it's not like that. Like, be compassionate, right? This is a loving relationship. If you end up married to someone, they're going to make so many mistakes and you're going to have to constantly forgive them. So it's not about being a ball buster, but it's about getting clear about the kind of character the person has. If he texts you 5 days in a row and then stops and you don't hear from him for 5 days, that would warrant a conversation. Because that also reveals something about his character. That reveals that, he's in it for the short term, but not the long term. I wouldn't necessarily completely throw the relationship out in that instance, but it would definitely warrant a conversation. And if that conversation didn't go well, then that might be a deal breaker. I really want to presence that the message for today is that you can never know that it's time to walk until you have given it 100%. And so many of us are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the other person to give it 100%. And we're saying, when they give it 100%, I'll give it 100%. And if two people are doing that, nobody ever gives it 100% and the relationship fizzles out. And all it might have taken was one person, and it honestly doesn't matter if it was the woman or the man, but all it might have taken was one person to bring that 100% to completely alter the context of the relationship forever. Somebody might be out there, somebody you might end up on a date with very soon, might be out there, not even knowing that 100% is possible. A lot of you listening to this right now didn't even know that 100% was possible until you heard this conversation. So if you didn't know it, you can't expect someone else to know it. So there are a lot of people out there that don't even know that 100% is possible. But when they experience someone bringing 100%, they suddenly go, oh, I get it. This is how we're supposed to be. My wife and I, when we started dating, we said that. We're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. No bullshit. I like you. You like me. I call you. You answer. You call me back. I text you. You text me back. I plan a trip to see you. You plan a trip to see me. I ask you a question. You give me a straight up answer, even if I don't always like the answer. Oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I think my wife and I both knew what we wanted it to be like, but we never got the chance to experience that until we met someone else who was willing to go there with us. And what I want to say is, if you're listening to this conversation right now, you're a step ahead of most people out there. You just are. So it's highly likely, because you're a step ahead of most people, that the responsibility is going to be on you to go there. And don't sit back and be like, well, why does it have to be me? And wham, wham, wham. Don't do that. Just own it. Like, okay, why does it have to be me? Because I am the most emotionally responsible one in the relationship. That's why it has to be me. And also, it has to be me because I recognize that I teach people how to treat me. And if I want this person to treat me the way I want them to treat me, I've got to teach them what that is. So that's why it has to be me. And I'm not going to cry about it. I'm not going to lament it. I'm just going to get emotionally prepared to be that person in every single situation. And what I want to say is most of us don't realize how close we are to the relationship we're looking for. A lot of us feel that we're beating our head against the wall, one dead end connection after another, after another, after another, without ever realizing that there's something we could bring to the table that would forever shift our entire experience of it. When I see people start relating like this, what happens immediately is across the board, they have better connections with every single person. Their connections are deeper, they're richer, they're more intimate, they're more vulnerable, they're more authentic. When I see people relating like this, even when they're not attracted to the person or they don't want a second date, they still have great first dates. Because they're connected, because they're enjoying it, because they're happy to be there with the person. And the fact that maybe I don't want to see them again doesn't really matter. It's not preventing me from being connected and enjoying my time with them right now. You see, there's a level of emotional availability that we have to bring to the table first before we can expect to receive that back. Now, I've given the example of, if you send that text after the first date and they just don't respond at all, I'd be out. I'd be like, okay, got it. Message loud and clear. I'm out. Should I walk? Yes. If you have that conversation about, I'd really love to hear from you more consistently, and they don't make any kind of effort towards that. Should I walk? Yes. And we can continue that same theme all through the first year, all through the second year, all through the rest of your lives. And I do really mean all through the rest of your lives, because there's no point when this stops. There's no point in a relationship or in a marriage when you stop communicating about your needs, when you stop asking for what you want. You never reach a point where it's just a done deal. This is not a dating skill. This is a relationship skill. If you learn it while you're dating, your marriage will be much better in the future. And you think it's vulnerable to put yourself out there with a stranger. This might sound counterintuitive, but a stranger you never have to see again. It's actually a lot more vulnerable to put yourself out there with someone you're spending your life with, when no matter what you say or what you do, you got to wake up to them the next day. We often think that dating is hard, and when we get into a relationship, it's going to be easier. And some things are, right? Some things are when I want to go out to dinner, I don't have to find someone to do it with. My wife is there and we go, right? So some things are easier. But in terms of intimacy, it doesn't get easier. It just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper you go with someone, the more you reveal yourself to them, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The more they start to see every aspect of you, things you've never shown anybody, the more uncomfortable it becomes. And so getting comfortable with vulnerability, getting comfortable with authentic self-expression now rather than later is a huge, huge, huge asset for you. It's going to make all the difference. So I want to leave you with that today. I want to leave you with that. And just, the challenge in today's episode is really just to press beyond your own boundaries, to understand that whatever rejection you're afraid of, whatever judgment you're afraid of, I'm afraid that they're going to think I like them more than they like me. Who cares what they think? They could think you're a purple elephant for all you care. If it's not compatible, you're never going to see them again. And if it is compatible, they're going to learn a lot more about you than just that. So there's nothing to hide from. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just simply getting comfortable with owning and expressing all of your truth and not adjusting that for anyone. You know, some of us are comfortable expressing our truth 90% of the time. And when we get attracted to someone, we can no longer do it. This is stepping into I am me 100% across the board with everyone. So I want to leave you with that today. And I just want to make one last minute invitation. We have recently reopened the Inspired Love program for enrollment. And if you're listening to this right now and you're going like, I hear you, I get it, it makes sense, I feel this, but I cannot even realistically begin to imagine communicating with someone that way. I want to read you, this is actually from a student in my Inspired Love program. This was a text message that I recommended she sent to someone she was dating. And I just want to give you this as an example of the kinds of things we actually work with in the program. So I recommended she sent this message. Hi, it was nice to reconnect with you the other day. However, I'm a bit confused. After our date, we discussed seeing each other again, and then I never heard from you. I would like to see you again and see where this could lead, but when I don't hear from you for days on end, it doesn't give me the confidence that there's a lot of potential here. I just need to be honest with you about that. And if you are really interested in getting to know each other, that would be nice, with a smiley face. So this is just an example, real life situation. She had been on a date with the person. At the end of the date, they had said that they wanted to see each other again, and then she hadn't heard from him. Now, I want to be clear. There wasn't like, oh, well, I'm going to call you tomorrow or anything like that. It was just generally, yeah, it'd be nice to see each other again, right? And so because there had never been this kind of communication on the table, I said, before you walk away, you got to put it out there. How he responds to this message is going to tell you everything you need to know. And so if you know that developing this kind of communication is something you need to work on, that is exactly what we do in the program. I take you step by step, help you navigate every single situation to lead to the maximum possible outcome for everyone involved. And it's not an accident that within a few months, 90% of the women in the program end up in a really awesome relationship. Like, it's not an accident, because this is what I just said earlier, is like, most people don't realize how close they actually are. They just have these unconscious patterns that keep sabotaging them over and over and over and over again. And they feel like they're a million miles away. No, you're actually not a million miles away. We just need to tweak a few simple things so that as you're going on dates, you're actually maximizing the possibility on those dates. And when you start showing up that way, before you know it, something's going to take off pretty quickly. And so I just want to say, if you're ready to do that kind of work, if you're ready to step into your power, your authenticity, your courage, if you're ready to really stand for yourself and the love that you want to have, that you know you deserve to have, I just want to invite you to go ahead and apply for the program. The way it works is you book a free discovery call. There's no cost for the call. You get on the call. You're actually going to meet with another graduate of the program. So we don't have professional salespeople. We just have program graduates who do the calls. And they're just going to tell you their experience, what they got out of the program, help you understand what it might do for you. If you feel like it's the right thing, jump in. If you don't feel like it's the right thing, no hard feelings. But, you know, this is a process that's been proven to work over and over and over again. And I just want to invite you, if you feel like you're ready to do that kind of work, to take that leap and jump in with us. So for those of you who are live today, if you're interested, just shoot me a message and I'll happily connect you with that. For those of you who are listening to this podcast, go ahead and write down in the description below, wherever you're listening to this, you can apply to work with us there. All right. Lots of love, everybody. Had a pleasure being with you today. I'll see you back here next Tuesday. Take care and bye.